The last shovel of dirt on my husband's grave felt less like an ending and more like a starting pistol. I stood there, cocooned in a black wool coat that had outlived 2 prime ministers and one of my own children, and I did not cry. Crying was a luxury, a performance I had long since retired from. Richard was dead. That was the fact. The feelings would have to wait their turn. Flanking me, my son David and his wife Chloe were putting on a masterclass in manufactured grief. David, a man perpetually stooped by the weight of a father he could never please, stared at the mound of fresh earth with a passable imitation of sorrow. His hand was on my elbow, a gesture that was meant to look supportive, but felt more like a brand, a claim of ownership. He was 55, but in that moment he looked like a boy who had broken a vase and was waiting for the inevitable punishment. Chloe, however, was in her element. For an influencer whose niche was aspirational wellness, a high society funeral was premium content. She dabbed at her perfectly dry, expertly made-up eyes with a silk handkerchief. Then, with a subtlety she thought was invisible, she angled her phone. I saw it in the reflection of a polished headstone. A slight tilt of her head, a carefully practiced downturn of her lips. A click, somber selfie secured. I could already imagine the caption. Saying goodbye to a titan. So much grief, but holding space for gratitude. Number family first. Number legacy. Number grief journey. The thought was so vulgar, it almost made me laugh. The performance continued back at the house. The Vance estate, a sprawling monument to Richard's ambition, felt cold and hollow. A museum to a man who collected beautiful things but never truly enjoyed them. People I hadn't seen in years drifted through the rooms, murmuring condolences, their eyes cataloguing the art on the walls, the silver on the sideboards. They ate the canapés, drank Richard's best single malt, and spoke of him in hushed, reverent tones. They spoke of the titan of industry, the philanthropist, the visionary. They didn't speak of the man who would grip my arm in the dark, his voice a low hiss, reminding me that everything I had, including my own name, was a gift from him. A gift he could rescind at any moment. David and Chloe worked the room like politicians, accepting sympathies as if they were campaign donations. Finally, as the last of the mourners trickled out into the manicured twilight, Chloe glided over to me. I was standing by the grand fireplace, staring into the embers, the only honest thing in the house. She placed a hand on my arm. It was cool and smooth, adorned with a diamond ring that Richard had paid for. "Elizabeth," she began, her voice a carefully modulated blend of concern and pity. "We need to talk." I turned my head slowly to look at her. "Do we, Chloe? We're just so worried about you," she said, ignoring my question. "This house, it's so much. The upkeep, the staff, the memories. It must be a tremendous burden." David drifted over, positioning himself beside his wife, a loyal lieutenant. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was studying a knot in the Persian rug, as if it held the secrets to the universe. "Chloe's right, Mom. It's too big for you to manage alone. We want to simplify things. For you." There it was, the opening salvo. Not even the decency to let the man's ashes cool. Simplify. A word that sounded so clean, so helpful. But I knew what it really meant. It meant erase. Erase me from the equation. "I've been managing this house for 50 years, David," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I managed it when your father was building his empire. I managed it while raising you. I believe my capabilities are a matter of public record." Chloe's smile tightened. It was a small, almost imperceptible shift, but I saw it. The flash of irritation behind the mask of compassion. "Of course, Elizabeth. You've been incredible. A rock. But that's the point. You've spent your whole life taking care of everyone else. It's time for someone to take care of you. And you two have volunteered for the position, I asked. We've been looking into some options, David mumbled, finally looking up. His eyes were pleading for me to make this easy on him, pleading for me to just go along, to be the pliant, docile mother he needed me to be. Places that are lovely, more like resorts, really. 5-star care, communities of people your own age. A community, I repeated, tasting the word. You want to put me in a community. We want you to be safe, Chloe purred, squeezing my arm. And comfortable, free from all this responsibility. She gestured vaguely at the room, at the house, at the life I had built, as if it were a pile of dirty laundry. I looked from her perfectly sculpted face to my son's weak chin. I saw the whole pathetic conspiracy laid bare. It wasn't just about the house. It was about the portfolio, the trusts, the entire Vance fortune. They saw me not as a mother or a widow, but as a stubborn, inconvenient gatekeeper, an 80-year-old lock on a vault they were desperate to crack open. For decades, I had played my part. The supportive wife, the gracious hostess, the silent partner. Richard had demanded it. He had built the cage, and I had learned to live inside it. It was a gilded cage, to be sure, with silk linings and diamond bars, but it was a cage nonetheless. He had controlled the money, the narrative, my very identity, and in his absence, his own son, his own flesh and blood, was trying to shove me into a smaller one. I felt a cold, clear anger rise within me. It was an old friend I hadn't visited in a long time. It felt clean, powerful. I had spent a lifetime accommodating the egos of powerful, foolish men. First my father, then my husband. I would not spend my final years accommodating the greed of his weak-willed son and his vapid, grasping wife. I gave them a small, tired smile. It was the smile they expected. The smile of a woman worn down by grief, ready to be led. I'm very tired, I said. Perhaps we can discuss this in a day or two. Oh, relief washed over David's face. He visibly relaxed. Of course, Mom. Of course. You get some rest. Chloe's smile was triumphant. We'll handle everything, she said. You just focus on healing. They thought they had won. They thought the old woman was folding, just as she always had. As I watched them walk away, their heads close together, already plotting, I thought of a conversation I'd had with Richard years ago. He was boasting about a corporate takeover. The key, Elizabeth, he'd said, swirling brandy in a glass, is to make them think capitulation was their own idea. You let them feel like they are choosing their own surrender. I walked over to the mahogany desk, the one Richard had lorded over for half a century. I ran my hand over the cool, polished wood. He had taught me more than he ever realized, and they had no idea who they were dealing with. They saw a frail, grieving widow. They were about to meet the woman who had survived Richard Vance. 2 days later, they arrived not for a discussion, but for an extraction. They came in Chloe's white Tesla, a silent, predatory shark of a car, and they came with my luggage. Not all of it, of course. Just a few curated, sensible pieces they had packed themselves. The rest, Chloe explained, would be put into storage. Simplified. She breezed into the foyer, her voice a weaponized form of cheerfulness. Elizabeth! Good morning. We have the most wonderful news. I was sitting in the morning room, a cup of tea untouched before me. I had been up since dawn, watching the light change over the gardens. I had been waiting. We found the most perfect place for you, Chloe announced, as if she were revealing I'd won the lottery. It's called Silver Creek Meadows. And honestly, it's more like the Four Seasons than well, you know. They have a spa, a Michelin-rated chef, water aerobics. You're going to love it. Oh, David hovered behind her, carrying a suitcase. He looked like a bellhop in his own mother's home. "We've taken care of all the paperwork, Mom. Paid for the first 6 months up front. The Premier Suite. It has a lovely view of the Rose Garden." They spoke in tag team formation, a well-rehearsed pitch designed to overwhelm and disarm. They didn't ask. They informed. This was not a negotiation. It was a verdict. I remained silent. I let their words hang in the air, let the sheer audacity of it all settle in the space between us. My silence was a vacuum, and it made them uncomfortable. They started to fill it with more words, more justifications, their voices getting just a little too loud, a little too bright. "It's all about proactive wellness," Chloe chirped, pulling a brochure from her ludicrously expensive handbag. The cover showed a smiling, silver-haired couple playing chess by a sparkling pool. "It's about embracing this new chapter with support and vitality. We'll be able to visit all the time," David added quickly, "and we won't have to worry about you being all alone in this big place. We can manage your affairs, handle the bills, the investments, let you just relax." He said it. The quiet part. Manage your affairs. Asterisk. The keys to the kingdom. I slowly stood up. I looked at the suitcase they had packed for me. I wondered what they had chosen. The sensible cardigans? The comfortable shoes? The artifacts of old age they had assigned to me? "My phone," I said. It was the first thing I had spoken. Chloe's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Oh, yes. About that. We were thinking, maybe it would be best if we held on to it for you for a little while." "You were thinking that," I repeated. "It's just, all the calls can be so stressful." David jumped in, his words tumbling out. "Calls from the lawyers, the accountants, people bothering you about the estate. It's too much to handle right now. We'll field everything. Keep the stress away from you. It's a temporary measure. For your peace of mind." They were taking my voice, my connection to the outside world. This was the masterstroke. Isolate the target. Control the flow of information. It was a chapter straight out of Richard's playbook. I looked at my son, really looked at him. I saw the weakness there, the desperate need for the money he felt he was owed, but also a flicker of something else. Shame. It was small, buried deep beneath layers of entitlement and self-justification, but it was there. He knew this was wrong. He just wasn't strong enough to stop it. He had never been strong enough. I remembered him as a boy, 10 years old, standing in the doorway of the library, watching his father shout at me, his little fists clenched at his sides. He had seen the cruelty, the casual tyranny, and he had done nothing. He had just slipped away, back to his room, leaving me to face it alone. He had been complicit in my gilded cage since childhood. This was not a new betrayal, just a new chapter of an old one. I gave a slow, deliberate nod. "All right." The relief that flooded their faces was disgusting. It was the look of thieves who have successfully picked a lock. They thought my one-word answer was surrender. They mistook compliance for defeat. They didn't understand that in a war, sometimes the most powerful move is to allow your enemy to walk into the trap you've set. The drive to Silver Creek Meadows was a surreal performance of familial bliss. Chloe chattered on about her plans for redecorating the main house, something a little more minimalist, a bit more now, while David drove, his eyes fixed on the road, occasionally offering a bland comment about the weather. They put on a soothing playlist of instrumental music, the kind you hear in a spa waiting room. It was all part of the anesthetic they were administering. They escorted me through the gleaming automatic doors of Silver Creek Meadows. The air inside smelled of lemon polish and something vaguely floral. It was pristine, sterile, a lobby designed to look like a luxury hotel with beige armchairs and abstract art that was chosen to be inoffensive to everyone and inspiring to no one. A smiling woman in a crisp uniform greeted us. "Welcome to the Meadows, Mrs. Vance. We are so thrilled to have you join our community." Community. There was that word again. They walked me down a long, silent corridor. The carpet was so thick, it swallowed the sound of our footsteps. It felt like walking through snow. They opened the door to my roomy suite. It was spacious, clean, and utterly soulless. A bed, a small sofa, a television bolted to the wall, and a large window with a view of a meticulously pruned, unnaturally perfect rose garden. It was a beautiful prison cell. "Isn't it lovely?" Chloe breathed, her voice echoing slightly in the empty room. "We'll help you get unpacked." "No," I said. My voice was quiet, but it stopped them both. "I'd like to rest now. I'm very tired." It was the perfect excuse. The grieving, exhausted old woman. They bought it instantly. "Of course," David said, placing the suitcase by the bed. "You just settle in. Someone will be by with dinner later." Chloe leaned in and kissed the air beside my cheek. Her perfume was expensive and suffocating. "We'll call you tomorrow to see how you're doing." The irony of the statement was lost on her. They left. I listened to their footsteps recede down the hall. I stood perfectly still in the center of the room until I heard the distant chime of the elevator. Then I walked to the door. I didn't try the handle. I knew it would be locked from the outside. Not a real lock, not a key lock, but a modern, electronic one. The kind that requires a key card to enter. A polite lock. A lock that pretends it isn't one. I felt it click shut. Not on the door, but on a life I was about to burn to the ground. For the next several hours, I did nothing. I sat on the sterile sofa and watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I watched the automatic sprinklers come on in the perfect rose garden. I listened to the rhythms of the building, the soft chimes, the quiet rolling of carts in the hallway, the murmur of voices. I was gathering intelligence, mapping the terrain of my new cage. A nurse, young and cheerful, came in with a tray, a bland piece of poached salmon, some steamed asparagus, a scoop of quinoa, the kind of food you eat when you're trying to live forever, or when someone else has decided you should. She checked my blood pressure. She asked me if I needed anything. Her kindness was genuine, but programmatic. I was a task on her list. Patient in 3B. Settle in. Observe. I ate a few bites, for appearances. I drank the water. When she came back to collect the tray, I was in the armchair. A book I'd found on the shelf open in my lap. I hadn't read a single word. "You have a good night, Mrs. Vance," the nurse said, her smile unwavering. "Just press the call button if you need anything at all." "Oh, thank you," I said. "I'm sure I'll be fine." I waited. I waited through the 9 p.m. check. The soft click of the door. The beam of a small flashlight cutting through the darkness. The quiet retreat. I waited another hour after that, listening to the building settle into a deeper quiet. The silence of the night shift. Then, and only then, did I move. My hands did not shake. My heart did not race. I felt a profound and terrifying calm, the kind a general must feel in the moments before ordering the first charge. I walked over to the closet, where they had hung a few of my things. I reached for my oldest handbag, a vintage leather satchel that Richard had always hated. He'd called it my dumpy old thing. I'd kept it for that very reason. My fingers found the seam in the silk lining, a seam I had carefully, painstakingly unstitched and restitched myself 3 months ago, sitting in my sewing room while Richard was at one of his endless board meetings. My fingers slipped inside the hidden pocket. They closed around a small, hard object. I pulled it out. It was a burner phone, a cheap, untraceable, pay-as-you-go slab of plastic I had purchased for cash at a 7-Eleven in a town 30 miles away. I had bought it the week after Richard's diagnosis. The doctors had given him 6 months. I knew with a certainty that chilled my bones what would happen the moment he was gone. I had seen the way Chloe looked at the house. I had seen the desperation in David's eyes. I had been planning for this day for a very long time. Richard had taught me to be prepared for every eventuality, to anticipate betrayal before it happened. It was the most useful lesson he had ever given me. The phone had only one number stored in its memory. I sat on the edge of the bed, the cheap plastic feeling solid and real in my hand, a talisman of rebellion. I held my thumb over the green call button. This was it. The point of no return. For a moment, a flicker of doubt. The lifetime of conditioning. Be quiet. Be good. Don't make waves. The ghost of Richard's voice in my ear, telling me I was foolish, that I was nothing without him. I thought of Chloe's selfie at the grave. I thought of David's averted eyes as he handed me over like a parcel. I thought of 50 years in a gilded cage. My wings clipped, my voice silenced. The doubt vanished, burned away by the cold fury that had been simmering for decades. I pressed the button. It rang once. A familiar voice, crisp and professional, answered immediately. Harrison. Arthur Harrison. Milavia. More accurately, he had been my father's lawyer, and then Richard's. Before Richard decided he was too old-fashioned and moved the bulk of the family's business to a slicker, more aggressive firm downtown. But I had kept Harrison on a private retainer for years. A secret of my own. He was a man of immense discretion and unwavering loyalty, a relic from an era when a lawyer's word was his bond. He knew more about the Vance family's real history than anyone alive, except for me. Arthur, I said. My voice was low, steady, devoid of any emotion. It's Elizabeth. There was no surprise in his voice, just a quiet readiness. I've been expecting your call. Are you secure? As secure as one can be in a luxury prison, I said. They did it, just as we anticipated. The house, the phone, everything. The polite kidnapping was a success. They think I've been neutralized. There was a short pause on the other end of the line. I could picture him in his study, surrounded by leather-bound books, a glass of something strong at his elbow. Then I assume you are ready to give the instruction. It's time, Arthur, I said. The words felt momentous, like stones being laid on a scale, tipping the balance of power for the first time in my adult life. Tell me exactly what you want me to do, Elizabeth. I took a breath. I wasn't just cutting them off. I was laying a siege. I was taking the castle, changing the locks, and raising my own flag. I gave the order, my voice as cold and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. Freeze everything, I commanded. And I mean everything. The primary family trust. Richard's executive trust. The joint accounts David and I share. Liquidate the brokerage accounts and move the cash into the holding company we set up. The one registered in Delaware. The one they don't know exists. All of it? Harrison asked, not for confirmation, but for emphasis. He was making sure the record was clear. Every last dollar, I said. The investment portfolios. The offshore accounts in the Caymans that Richard thought only he knew about. The credit lines. Shut them down. I want David and Chloe's American Express cards to be declined by morning. I want their access to the Vance financial world to cease to exist when they wake up tomorrow. I want them to be rich on paper and penniless in reality. I could hear the faint scratching of his pen on a legal pad. He was making a checklist. It will be done, he said. His voice held a grim satisfaction. He had never liked Richard, and he had even less regard for David and Chloe. They will fight it, you know. They will file for conservatorship. They will claim you are incompetent. I'm counting on it, I said. Let them. Let them bring the war to a battlefield of my choosing. They think this is about money. They have no idea what this is really about. Consider it done, Elizabeth. The machine is in motion. One more thing, Arthur, I said, looking out the window at the dark, manicured garden, a symbol of the beautiful, orderly prison I had inhabited for so long. Name it. My reply was simple, a final, definitive command that would set the world on fire. Now, the clinking of silverware on porcelain was the only sound Chloe noticed, a delicate symphony of wealth she'd worked so hard to orchestrate. Aria, the restaurant of the moment, was a stage, and she was its star. Every angle was perfect, from the soft glow of the minimalist chandeliers to the way her diamond earrings caught the light. David sat opposite her, swirling a burgundy in a glass so large it looked like a crystal ball. He was trying to project an aura of command, of a man inheriting his rightful kingdom, but she could see the strain in the tight set of his jaw, the slight tremor in his hand that the wine was meant to conceal. The funeral was a week behind them, a lifetime ago. The old woman was safely tucked away. It was time to celebrate. To new beginnings, Chloe said, raising her glass. Her voice was a purr, practiced and smooth. She'd already posted a picture of their wine glasses to her Instagram story, captioning it, "A quiet moment to reflect." So much to be grateful for, with a white heart emoji. The performance never stopped. David grunted his agreement, taking a large gulp of wine. To things finally getting back on track. He put the glass down with a thud that was a little too forceful. This whole transition has been draining. Of course, darling. Chloe soothed, reaching across the table to pat his hand. Her touch was light, possessive, but it was for the best. For her. She needs professional care. We did the right thing. Oh, I know. I know we did. He didn't sound convinced. He sounded like a man repeating a lie until it became a truth. The waiter, a young man with a professionally neutral expression, glided to their table. "Will that be all for this evening, Mr. and Mrs. Vance?" "Just the check, thank you," Chloe said, giving him a dazzling smile. She handed him her Black American Express card without looking at it. It was a fluid, dismissive gesture she'd seen other powerful women make. A moment later, the waiter returned, his face still a mask of politeness, but with a flicker of something uncomfortable in his eyes. "I'm very sorry, Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice a low murmur. "The card has been declined." Chloe's smile froze. "What? That's impossible. Run it again." "I did, madam. Twice." A cold knot formed in David's stomach. He saw the flush creeping up Chloe's neck, the hard, angry glint in her eyes. This was not part of the script. "It's fine," David said, trying to wave away the embarrassment. He pulled out his own wallet, retrieving a platinum visa. "Here, use this." The waiter took the card and disappeared. Chloe's nails drummed a frantic, silent rhythm on the tablecloth. "What is wrong with our bank? This is mortifying. The server probably thinks we're grifters." "It's a glitch, Chloe. Calm down." But the waiter returned, his expression even more pained than before. He held David's card between two fingers, as if it were contaminated. "Sir, my apologies. This one was also declined." The air left the room. The ambient chatter of the restaurant seemed to fade into a dull roar. David stared at the card, then at the waiter. Humiliation, hot and sharp, pierced through his wine-induced haze. This didn't just happen to people like them. "There is a mistake," David said, his voice low and dangerous. "A significant one. Perhaps you'd like to try another card, sir?" The waiter suggested, his professional calm starting to fray. David didn't have another card of that limit. They had siphoned most of their liquid assets into renovations for the main house, a new car for Chloe, investments he'd made to prove he was a better businessman than his father. All of it predicated on the imminent, unimpeded flow of the Vance inheritance. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. I need to make a phone call. He walked to the restaurant's vestibule, his heart pounding a frantic, ugly beat against his ribs. Chloe followed, her face a mask of pale fury. He dialed their private banker, a man who usually answered on the first ring. It went to voicemail. He tried the bank's main concierge line. After an agonizing series of automated prompts, a human voice came on the line. Vance, David Vance. Account number. He rattled it off from memory. I'm having an issue with my cards, both of them. They're being declined. There was a long pause, filled with the clicking of a keyboard. The representative came back on, her voice devoid of any warmth. One moment, sir. The hold music was a soulless classical piece that grated on his last nerve. Chloe was pacing behind him, her heels clicking like a time bomb. Finally, the voice returned. Yes, Mr. Vance. I see the issue. There appears to be a blanket freeze on all accounts associated with the Vance family trust. David felt the blood drain from his face. A what? On whose authority? The order was placed this morning, sir. It's an omnibus directive from the primary trustee's legal counsel. Primary trustee? That's my mother, Elizabeth Vance. She's in a nursing home. She's not capable of making that kind of decision. According to our records, sir, the directive was executed by Mr. Arthur Harrison of Harrison and Associates on behalf of Mrs. Elizabeth Vance, who is listed as being of sound mind and full legal authority. The freeze extends to all joint accounts, credit lines, and investment portfolios. Harrison, her doddering old lawyer, the man who'd been sending her birthday cards for 40 years. David couldn't breathe. Freeze? What does that mean exactly? It means, sir, that no funds can be withdrawn or transferred. All lines of credit are suspended until the hold is lifted by the primary trustee or by court order. Is there anything else I can help you with? The woman's voice was clipped, official. She was reading from a script his mother had written. He hung up without answering. He turned to Chloe, his face ashen. She did it. The old witch. She did it. I'm too. Chloe's eyes widened, disbelief warring with rage. What are you talking about? Did what? She froze everything. Every penny. Harrison did it for her. They stood there, in the opulent, marble-floored vestibule, suddenly impoverished aliens in their own world. They had just enough cash between them to pay the bill, a humbling act that felt like a surrender. The drive home was silent, thick with a shared, suffocating panic. When they got back to the palatial, half-renovated house they now couldn't afford, Chloe's instincts took over. She grabbed her phone, her thumbs flying across the screen. She opened Instagram, went to her story. She chose a picture of herself from a week ago, looking somber and beautiful in her funeral attire. She typed out a caption, carefully crafting each word for maximum impact. Sometimes the ones you try to care for the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. Please send prayers for our family. We are navigating a difficult, private matter with an elderly loved one. It's a pain I wouldn't wish on anyone. Number elderly cruelty. Number family first. Number heartbroken. She hit post. The vague, manipulative sympathy bait was her first weapon. David, meanwhile, was frantically trying to call Silver Creek Meadows. Yes, I need to speak to Elizabeth Vance. In room 3B, he barked into the phone. A calm, infuriatingly polite voice answered on the other end. I'm sorry, sir, but Mrs. Vance has left instructions that she is not to be disturbed. She's turned in for the evening. I don't care what instructions she's left. I am her son. Put me through. Now. Our residents' privacy and wishes are our top priority, sir. I can take a message and pass it along to her in the morning. This isn't a social call, he roared, his voice cracking. This is an emergency. I understand your frustration, sir. However, our policy is firm. Unless it is a medical emergency verified by a physician, we must honor Mrs. Vance's request. Have a pleasant evening. The line went dead. He threw his phone against the wall. It didn't shatter, just clattered to the expensive hardwood floor, scarred. The silence that followed was immense. It wasn't just the absence of a dial tone. It was the silence from room 3B. The silence of a woman who had, with a single phone call, severed their lifelines and locked herself behind a fortress of rules and policies they had paid for. The silence was not passive, it was active. It was a declaration of war. And it was more terrifying than any argument, any threat, any fight they had ever had with her. It was the sound of their world grinding to a halt. The rage simmered for a full day before it boiled over. It was a day of frantic calls to lawyers who didn't call back, of notifications for automatic payments that had failed, of the dawning, horrific realization of just how completely they had been cut off. The next afternoon they didn't call ahead. They drove the 40 minutes to Silver Creek Meadows, their fury a third passenger in the silent, tense car. They stormed through the polished lobby, ignoring the receptionist's call of "Sirs, you need to sign in." They found her in the communal garden. The sun was warm, the scent of roses and freshly cut grass hung in the air. Other residents were sitting in wicker chairs, dozing or chatting quietly. And there was Elizabeth, in a simple linen dress, a wide-brimmed hat shielding her face, calmly reading a thick paperback. She looked serene, peaceful. It was obscene. David's shadow fell over her book. She didn't look up immediately. She took her time, carefully marking her page with a ribbon before slowly closing the cover. Only then did she lift her gaze, her eyes clear and steady behind her reading glasses. "David." "Chloe," she said. Her voice was even, with no trace of surprise, as if she'd been expecting them. "What have you done?" David's voice was a low, seething hiss. He didn't want to make a scene in front of the other residents, but his anger was a physical thing, a wild animal clawing at his insides. Elizabeth looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I'm not sure what you mean. I'm enjoying a novel. It's quite good." "Don't play games with me, mother." The word mother was an accusation. "The accounts. The money. You froze everything. You're trying to ruin us." Chloe stepped forward, her face twisted with a venomous smile. "We know what you're doing, and it won't work. This little stunt just proves our point. You're not well. You're confused. Paranoid." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We'll get power of attorney, Elizabeth. We will have you declared mentally unfit. We'll show a court that you're a danger to yourself and the family estate. This little temper tantrum will be the prime exhibit." Elizabeth's gaze didn't waver. She slowly, deliberately, lowered her book to her lap. She looked past Chloe, past the anger and the threats, and looked directly at her son. Her eyes held his, and for a moment, the sunny garden, the scent of roses, it all dissolved. The world shifted, the decades peeling back like sun-bleached wallpaper. He was no longer a 45-year-old man of industry. He was 12. The air in their cavernous home was thick with the smell of burnt meat and his father's rage. Richard stood in the dining room, his face purple. In his hand was a shard of a porcelain plate. The rest of it was shattered against the far wall, a white explosion next to a dark smear of gravy. "Is this a joke?" Richard's voice was a roar that seemed to shake the crystal on the sideboard. "I work 60, 70 hours a week breaking my back for this family. And I come home to this? To a $200 cut of steak cooked until it's leather?" A younger Elizabeth stood by the table, her hands clenched at her sides, her face pale. She was trembling, but her voice was quiet. I'm sorry, Richard. I lost track of time. You lost track of time, he sneered, taking a step toward her. Your only job is to manage this house. One job, and you can't even do that right. Young David watched from the doorway, hidden in the shadows of the hall. His heart was a frantic bird trapped in his chest. He wanted to run, to shout, to do something, but fear was a chain, rooting him to the spot. He saw the terror in his mother's eyes, and he saw the dismissive contempt in his father's. He understood, in that moment, the brutal hierarchy of his world. There was the strong, and there was the weak. There was the one who shouted, and the one who flinched. His father turned his gaze from Elizabeth for a second, and his eyes met David's in the hall. Richard didn't soften. Instead, a grim, approving smirk touched his lips. It was a look that said, "Watch. Learn. This is how you handle things. This is how you maintain control." Asterisk. David looked away. He looked down at the Persian rug, focusing on the intricate patterns, tracing them with his eyes until they blurred. He didn't intervene. He didn't speak. He chose his side with his silence. He learned that his mother's pain was the price of his father's approval, the price of peace in the house. He learned to look away. The memory vanished as quickly as it came, shattered by the present. He was back in the sun-drenched garden, a grown man, but the echo of that 12-year-old's shame still clung to him. His mother was still looking at him, and for the first time, he saw not a frail old woman, but the woman from that dining room, the survivor, and her eyes held not confusion but a deep, ancient knowledge of him, of his cowardice. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was quiet, but it cut through him like a surgeon's scalpel. "You always were a quick study, David." "Wah." It was all she said. She didn't need to say more. In that one sentence, she laid his entire life bare. His ambition, his ruthlessness, his desperate need to be the man his father was. It was all just an echo of that boy in the hallway, looking away. Her silence had been his training ground, and now it was her shield. Her calm was her weapon. He had come here, expecting to intimidate a feeble old woman. Instead, he found himself facing a judge who had been presiding over his case for 30 years, and had finally delivered her verdict. He and Chloe stood there, their threats turning to ash in their mouths, defeated not by a shout but by a memory. The retreat from Silver Creek Meadows was a route. David and Chloe didn't just hire a lawyer, they hired a predator. Marcus Thorne of Stratton and Finch was a man who specialized in the bloody high-stakes wars of the 1%. His office was a testament to his successor panoramic view of the city, sleek chrome and leather furniture, and an aura of expensive, lethal competence. "The strategy is simple," Thorne said, steepling his fingers. He hadn't taken a single note. He didn't need to. "We don't fight her on the financials. Not at first. We attack the source. We paint a picture for the court. A grieving widow, suddenly alone after 60 years. She's vulnerable, isolated, confused. She's suffering from paranoid delusions, lashing out at the very people trying to protect her. She's not confused," David grumbled, staring out the window. "She's vicious." "It doesn't matter what she is," Thorne corrected, his voice smooth as silk. "It only matters what a judge believes. She is. Her lawyer, this Harrison fellow, is ancient. We'll position him as an opportunist, taking advantage of her fragile state, manipulating her for his own ends. We'll file for an immediate competency hearing. We'll have her subjected to a full psychiatric evaluation by a doctor of our choosing. We'll bury her in paperwork and depositions until she breaks. In her condition, it won't take long." Chloe leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. This, she understood. This was a battle of narratives, of perception. It was her home turf. "And my social media? I have a significant following. I can shape the story. Thorne gave a thin smile. Subtly, Mrs. Vance. We want sympathy, not a spectacle. The image of a devoted daughter-in-law, heartbroken by her mother-in-law's tragic decline. It's powerful. It creates a public record of your concern. Very useful. While they plotted their legal siege, a different kind of visit was taking place. Mia Vance pulled her beat-up Honda into the visitor's lot at Silver Creek Meadows. At 19, Mia possessed a quiet perceptiveness that her parents had long mistaken for passivity. She was a pre-law student, sharp and methodical, with a built-in skepticism for melodrama. She'd seen her mother's increasingly frantic Instagram posts, the carefully curated tragedy that felt cloying and false. She'd overheard her father's enraged phone calls, his voice tight with a kind of panic she'd never heard from him before. They had told her Grandma Elizabeth had taken a turn, that she was having episodes, that she'd become erratic, and was making terrible, self-destructive decisions. Mia braced herself as she walked through the doors, expecting to find a ghost of the grandmother. She knew a confused, frail woman lost in the fog of old age. She found Elizabeth in the sunroom, working on a complex jigsaw puzzle of Van Gogh's Starry Night. Grandma? Elizabeth looked up, and a genuine, radiant smile broke across her face. Mia, my dear. What a wonderful surprise. She stood and hugged her granddaughter, and Mia was struck by how firm her embrace was. She smelled of lavender and old books, a scent that was comfortingly familiar. Mom and Dad said, "They said you weren't feeling well," Mia said, her voice hesitant. Elizabeth pulled back, her eyes twinkling. "Oh? And what is the official diagnosis this week? Am I a tragic Ophelia or a raving King Lear?" Mia blinked, taken aback by the sharp, self-aware humour. "They're just worried, I think." "Of course they are," Elizabeth said, her tone perfectly neutral. She gestured to a chair opposite her. "Sit, tell me everything. How are your classes? Are you still drowning in torts? And are you still seeing that young man with the terrible taste in music?" They talked for over an hour. Elizabeth was not just lucid, she was razor sharp. She remembered the name of Mia's constitutional law professor, asked insightful questions about a paper she was writing, and offered a wry, witty critique of a modern art exhibit she'd only read about in the paper. She was the same grandmother Mia had always known. Intelligent, engaged, and with a dry wit that could cut through any pretense. There was no confusion, no paranoia. There was only a disturbing, profound calm. A calm that felt more like purpose than resignation. A seed of doubt, already planted by her parents' frantic behaviour, began to sprout in Mia's mind. This woman was not the person they were describing. Not even close. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong with the story she was being told. "Mom, she's been posting a lot online," Mia said carefully, testing the waters. "About being hurt." Elizabeth picked up a piece of the puzzle, a swirl of dark blue. She studied it for a moment before fitting it perfectly into place. "Your mother has always been very good at crafting a narrative, Mia. She sees the world as a story with herself, as the heroine. It's important, in life, to be able to distinguish between storytelling and the truth." The words hung in the air between them. It was not an accusation against Chloe. It was a lesson for Mia. A warning. As she was getting ready to leave, Mia's phone buzzed. It was a text from her mother. "How is she? Is she making any sense?" Mia looked from the phone to her grandmother, who was watching her with knowing eyes. An idea, cold and clinical, formed in Mia's mind. It felt like a betrayal, but also like a necessity. A way to anchor herself to reality in the storm of lies she felt was brewing. On her next visit, 3 days later, she came armed. As they sat down to talk, Mia took out her phone, opened the voice memo app, and pressed record. She placed the phone face down on the small table between them. "Grandma," she began, her voice a little shaky, "I need you to be honest with me. What is really going on? Elizabeth looked at the phone, then back at her granddaughter. A long, silent moment passed. Mia thought she had made a terrible mistake, that she had insulted her. But then Elizabeth gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. She understood. She knew her granddaughter needed proof, a record of the truth, and she was ready to provide it. The war room was no longer the sun-drenched garden, but Elizabeth's private room, sparse and impersonal. But the occupant was anything but. Days after Mia's clandestine recording, Elizabeth made another call. Not to a bank, but to the one man she trusted implicitly. The line connected, and Arthur Harrison's familiar, gravelly voice came through, filled with concern. "Elizabeth, are you all right? The Vance's new legal pit bull has been sending notices. They're filing for a competency hearing. I'm perfectly fine, Arthur." Elizabeth's voice was crisp, devoid of fear. The time for quiet observation was over. It was time to deploy her heavy artillery. "In fact, I'm better than I've been in years. I need you to listen very carefully. I have a task for you. Anything, Elizabeth. You know that. Go to the house. You still have the old key. It wasn't a question. Go to Richard's study. On the wall with the law books, the one facing the window. Start from the left, go to the third bookshelf. Count 5 shelves down from the top. Behind the leather-bound collection of Supreme Court rulings, there's a false back. You'll need to press the upper right corner. It's spring-loaded." Harrison was silent on the other end, absorbing the precision of the instructions. This was not the rambling of a confused mind. This was a blueprint. "Elizabeth, what's in there?" "A black leather ledger," she said. "Bring it to me. And Arthur, bring nothing else. Touch nothing else. And do not let anyone see you." The line went dead. As Harrison hung up the phone, the past washed over Elizabeth, as vivid and chilling as the day it happened. She was 28 years old, a young wife still trying to navigate the mercurial moods of her brilliant, terrifying husband. The tech company was just starting to take off. But Richard was already a man consumed by secrets. One evening, he called her into his study. He had a new ledger on his desk, bound in expensive, soft black leather. It felt heavy in her hands. Official. "I need your help with something, Lizzie," he'd said, his voice unusually gentle. It was the voice he used when he wanted to charm, to disarm. "Just a bit of household accounting. My own books are a mess. And you have such lovely, neat handwriting." He opened it to the first page. There were columns for dates, names, figures, and brief memos. "I'll give you the information," he explained, "and you just copy it down, exactly as I say. It's our little secret. Just keeping track of some side investments. You don't need to worry your pretty head about the details." And so, it became a ritual. Twice a month she would sit at his grand mahogany desk, the smell of his cigar smoke clinging to the curtains, and she would write. The names were unfamiliar shell corporations like Apex Holdings and Viridian Solutions, and individuals she'd never met. The figures were enormous, far beyond any household accounting. The memos were cryptic: consulting fee, Project Alpha funding, Alistair Finch resolution. She wrote every entry in her careful, perfect cursive. He believed she was a simple tool, a naive and dutiful wife, too terrified and too dim-witted to comprehend the magnitude of what she was documenting. He thought her ignorance was his greatest protection. He was wrong. She wasn't ignorant. She was a prisoner, and she was meticulously documenting the bars of her own cage. She saw the names from the ledger appear in the financial papers weeks later, attached to hostile takeovers or sudden corporate collapses. She heard Richard on the phone, his voice cold and triumphant, referencing Project Alpha as he discussed a rival company's sudden bankruptcy. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she was not a bookkeeper. She was an accomplice. This ledger wasn't a record of his success. It was a confession. It was the detailed, undeniable proof of the extortion, The industrial espionage, the corporate sabotage, the true illicit foundation upon which the entire Vance fortune had been built. For 50 years, that ledger had been her shame. It was the physical manifestation of her silence, of her complicity. Now, sitting in her sterile room in Silver Creek Meadows, she felt no shame. Only a cold, hard clarity. That ledger was no longer a symbol of her weakness. It was her weapon. It was the key that would not just unlock her from her gilded cage, but dismantle it, brick by bloody brick. It would prove that the fortune David and Chloe were so desperate to claim was not just tainted. It was poison. And she was finally ready to administer the antidote. The air in the courtroom was stale, smelling of old paper and cheap air freshener, trying to mask decades of human anxiety. It was a sterile beige room, designed to be devoid of emotion, yet today it was thick with it. David and Chloe sat at the plaintiff's table, their lawyer, a man named Marcus Davies, shuffling his papers with a performative confidence. Davies was all polished shoes and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He rose, his voice smooth and practiced, a river of practiced sympathy, flowing towards the judge. Your Honor, we are here today for a deeply painful, deeply personal reason. We are here out of love, a love for a mother, a grandmother, a matriarch, Elizabeth Vance. He gestured with an open palm towards Elizabeth, who sat beside Mr. Harrison, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She looked small in the large witness chair, but her posture was ramrod straight. We are here to protect her from herself. Davies began to pace, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that still carried to the back of the room. Over the past several months, since the tragic passing of her beloved husband, Richard, Mrs. Vance has exhibited troubling behavior, paranoia, confusion, erratic decision-making that puts the legacy her husband worked his entire life to build, a legacy meant to support this family for generations, at grave risk. He clicked a remote. A large screen flickered to life, showing a photograph. It was a picture Chloe had taken, a carefully framed shot of Elizabeth sitting in a garden at Silver Creek Meadows, a shawl around her shoulders, her face turned away from the camera. She looked wistful, lost. This is the woman we know, Davies said softly. Fragile, grieving. He clicked again. Another photo. Elizabeth staring out a window. The caption, which Davies read aloud, was from Chloe's Instagram. Watching Mom slip away is the hardest thing I've ever been through. Holding on to the memories. Number Alzheimer's awareness. Number family first. Number heartbroken. Mr. Harrison shifted in his seat, a low sound of disgust in his throat, but Elizabeth didn't move. She just watched the screen, her expression unreadable. My client, Chloe Vance. Davies continued. Will now speak to the court about her mother. In Law's recent state of mind. Chloe took the stand, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue she'd clearly had at the ready. She was dressed in a conservative navy blue dress, her hair pulled back. She looked like the perfect, concerned daughter. It's been so difficult, she began, her voice cracking. After Dad passed, it was like a switch flipped. She became so distant. She'd forget conversations we just had. She started talking about conspiracies, about people being out to get her. She accused David and me of terrible things. What sort of things? Davies prompted gently. That we wanted her money, Chloe whispered, as if the words themselves were poison. She looked at the judge, her eyes wide and pleading. We just want her to be safe. That's why we found Silver Creek for her. It's the best. It has round-the-clock nursing staff, memory care specialists. We took her phone because the calls were distressing her. People trying to take advantage. Financial advisors. She was getting confused. We were just trying to create a calm environment for her to heal. She spoke for 20 minutes, painting a picture of a woman lost in the fog of dementia, a paranoid, confused shell of her former self. She presented more photos, curated moments of supposed frailty, each one a lie wrapped in a filter. When she was done, she stepped down, shooting a look of tearful, triumphant pity at Elizabeth. The plaintiff rests its case for a temporary conservatorship, Your Honour, Davies announced. We believe the evidence of cognitive decline is clear and compelling. The judge, a woman in her late 50s with tired eyes, looked over at Elizabeth. Mrs. Vance, your counsel may call you to the stand. Yes, Your Honour, Harrison said, his voice a low, steady rumble. I call Elizabeth Vance. A low murmur went through the small gallery. David leaned forward, a flicker of something anxiety, perhaps crossing his face for the first time. Chloe just looked smug. Elizabeth rose with a slow, deliberate grace. She walked to the stand, her steps even, her gaze fixed forward. She didn't look frail, she didn't look confused. She looked like a woman walking to a throne. She sat, adjusted the microphone, and looked directly at the judge. The room fell silent. Mrs. Vance, Harrison began. You've heard the testimony of your daughter-in-law. You've seen the photographs. She paints a picture of a woman who is unwell, confused, paranoid. Is that how you see yourself? Elizabeth's voice, when it came, was not the reedy whisper of a frail old woman. It was clear, calm, and carried a weight of authority that silenced the air. No, Mr. Harrison, that is not how I see myself. That is how my son and my daughter-in-law wish to see me. It is a more convenient narrative for them. Davies shot to his feet. Objection, Your Honour. Speculation as to my client's motives. Sustained, the judge said, though her eyes were now fixed on Elizabeth with a new intensity. Mrs. Vance, please stick to the facts. Of course, Your Honour, Elizabeth said. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. The facts. I find them far more compelling than feelings anyway. Harrison nodded. Mrs. Vance, your son and daughter-in-law claim your decision to freeze your family's assets was erratic. Can you explain to the court why you gave that order? I gave that order because I discovered my son and his wife were systematically preparing to have me declared legally incompetent in order to gain control of the Vance family trust and its subsidiary holdings. David gasped. That's not true. We were trying to help you. Silence, Mr. Vance, the judge snapped, her gaze not leaving Elizabeth. Continue, Mrs. Vance. Thank you, Your Honour. My decision was not erratic. It was a defensive measure, a logical response to a credible threat. They call it paranoia. I call it pattern recognition. Davies stood again, a smirk on his face. Mrs. Vance, my clients are concerned about your memory. Let's test it. Can you tell me what you had for breakfast this morning? Elizabeth didn't even look at him. She kept her eyes on the judge. A half grapefruit, 1 piece of whole wheat toast, dry, and black coffee. But I doubt my breakfast choices are relevant to my ability to manage a multi-billion-dollar financial portfolio. Perhaps we should discuss something more pertinent. For example, the wire transfer for $2.7 million authorized by my son David on May 14th of this year to a shell corporation named Apex Holdings International, registered in the Cayman Islands. The blood drained from David's face. He stared at his mother, his mouth slightly open. Even Chloe's perfect composure cracked, a look of genuine shock flashing in her eyes. I don't know what you're talking about, David stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Elizabeth continued, her voice as crisp as a stock market ticker. Apex Holdings International is a pass-through entity. It exists only on paper. Its sole purpose is to obscure the movement of capital. That transfer was the first in a series of planned transactions designed to siphon liquid assets out of the primary Vance family trust and into accounts controlled solely by my son. An action that, according to the trust's charter, which was drafted by my late husband, requires the signatures of two primary trustees. My son possesses only one. Mine is the other. That is why I had to be removed. The judge leaned forward, her elbows on the bench. The tiredness was gone from her eyes, replaced by a laser-like focus. Mrs. Vance, how would you be aware of such a transaction? My husband was a brilliant man, Your Honour, Elizabeth said. He was also a deeply mistrustful one. He built multiple redundancies and alert systems into his financial architecture. I have been receiving encrypted daily reports on all capital movements within the Vance holdings for the last 35 years. I received them on a secure device that my son and his wife were not aware of when they confiscated my iPhone to, as they said, protect me from stressful calls. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the silent room. The Apex transfer was an anomaly. It triggered a high-level alert. I simply followed the trail. The same way I followed the trail to the $50,000 charge to my son's corporate expense account at a Patek Philippe boutique in Geneva 2 months ago, which he listed as client relations development. Or the $120,000 down payment on a new G-Wagon for my daughter-in-law, routed through a subsidiary real estate holding company, Silver Creek Properties LLC, to disguise it as a capital investment. Chloe made a small, strangled sound. The judge's expression had now morphed from sympathy to intense, almost predatory interest. She looked from Elizabeth's calm, implacable face to David's ashen one. "Mr. Davies," the judge said, her voice dangerously quiet, "your client painted a picture of a confused woman. The woman I see before me appears to have a more granular understanding of her family's finances than her own son. Would you care to explain this discrepancy?" Davies was sputtering, his smarmy confidence shattered. "Your Honour, this is a fabrication. She's taking disparate facts and weaving them into some paranoid fantasy." "Are they facts, Mr. Davies?" the judge pressed. "Mr. Vance, was there a wire transfer to a corporation in the Cayman Islands?" David couldn't speak. He just stared at his mother, a look of pure, unadulterated shock on his face. He hadn't just been caught. He had been exposed by a woman he had dismissed as a piece of furniture for his entire adult life. Elizabeth wasn't finished. "The paranoia, as they call it, is simply the result of paying attention. My husband taught me that. He taught me that fortunes are not protected by trust, but by vigilance. It seems that is one lesson my son failed to learn." Mr. Harrison stood. "Your Honour, I believe my client has more than established her competency. However, what she has revealed is merely the tip of the iceberg. The reason for the Vance's desperate attempt to seize control of the family fortune goes far deeper than simple greed. It is a matter of profound and systemic criminality, stretching back decades." He walked to his table and lifted a heavy black leather-bound ledger. It looked old, the leather worn smooth at the corners. He placed it on the clerk's desk to be marked as evidence. "I present to the court Exhibit A. We will call it the Vance Ledger." The air in the room crackled. This was no longer a competency hearing. It was something else entirely. Mr. Harrison set up a document projector. The first page of the ledger appeared on the screen behind him. It was filled with Elizabeth's neat, elegant, cursive, columns of dates, names, and numbers. "For 30 years, Harrison began, his voice echoing in the stunned silence. "Richard Vance used his wife, Elizabeth, as his personal bookkeeper. He believed she was a simple, naive woman, dutifully copying down figures she couldn't possibly understand. He would dictate these entries to her in his study at night. He saw it as a meaningless chore for a powerless wife, a way to involve her, to make her feel a part of his great enterprise. It was, as it turns out, his single greatest mistake. Harrison pointed to a line on the projected page. This entry, from 1998, a payment of $200,000 to a consultant named Michael Corrigan. Our research shows that Michael Corrigan was, at the time, a lead engineer at a rival tech firm, Innovate Dynamics. 1 month after this payment, Innovate Dynamics suffered a catastrophic data breach. 2 months after that, Vance Technologies launched a new product line featuring a proprietary microprocessing technology that was strikingly similar to a patent held by Innovate. He flipped the page. This entry, a series of structured payments to an offshore account, linked to a patent office clerk. These payments coincide precisely with the dates that Vance Technologies' chief competitor, a company called Omnicore, had their patent applications mysteriously and repeatedly rejected for procedural errors, while Vance Technologies' own nearly identical patents sailed through. He went on, page after damning page. He wasn't just reading entries. He was weaving a tapestry of crime. He showed the court how Richard Vance's celebrated tech empire, the foundation of the family's immense wealth, was not built on genius or innovation. It was built on a massive, sophisticated scheme of industrial espionage, patent theft, bribery, and blackmail. The fortune David and Chloe Vance are so desperate to control, Harrison declared, his voice ringing with righteous fury, is not a legacy. It is the proceeds of a 30-year criminal enterprise. The trusts they seek to access were not designed for posterity. They were designed, with brilliant and devilish complexity, to launder and legitimize stolen money, to wash it clean. End of Rukum. David looked like he was going to be sick. He was shaking his head, whispering, "No, no, that's not." He was a visionary. Harrison turned to Elizabeth, who still sat on the stand, a statue of cold composure. "Mrs. Vance, your husband trusted you with this ledger. He also, I believe, trusted you with the means to access the accounts where these funds were hidden. Is that correct?" Elizabeth nodded slowly. "He gave me the access codes, the keys to everything. It was on our 40th anniversary. He said it was a symbol of his complete trust in me. An empty gesture, he thought. He told me I would never need them, because he would always be there to take care of me." Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. He was wrong. The courtroom was in an uproar. Reporters in the gallery were frantically typing into their phones. The judge banged her gavel, her face a mask of grim fury. "Order! Order in this court!" But the chaos was nothing compared to the storm breaking inside David Vance. He surged to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. His face was blotchy, his eyes wild. He pointed a trembling finger at the witness stand, at his mother. "No!" he screamed, his voice raw with disbelief and public humiliation. "I didn't know! I knew nothing about any of this. My father, he was a great man. He was a hero. You're lying. You're a bitter, vengeful old woman. And you're trying to destroy his memory." The room fell silent again, the echo of David's desperate shout hanging in the air. Elizabeth didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply turned her head and looked at her son. For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed her face. It wasn't anger. It was a cold, profound pity. "I am not trying to destroy his memory, David," she said, her voice dropping, becoming intimate and terrifying. "I am simply telling the truth about it. And you are not being honest. You may not have known the details in this book, but you knew him. You knew what he was." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto his. "You were 10 years old. You were hiding at the top of the stairs. He had lost a major contract that day. He came home, and he was displeased. He took his anger out on me. You watched him hit me. You heard me cry. You saw the blood on my lip. And you did nothing. You crept back to your room and you put your pillow over your head. You knew he was a monster, David. You've always known. You just didn't care, as long as the money kept flowing, as long as the monster kept you safe and rich in his cave. David staggered back as if she had physically struck him. The memory, buried for decades, erupted in his mind's eye. The dark hallway, the sound of his father's rage, his mother's stifled sobs, his own paralyzing fear. Then, Elizabeth delivered the final devastating blow. But the dirty money, the stolen patents, that's not even the foundation, Your Honor. The foundation is much, much darker. Her gaze swept the courtroom, holding every single person captive. The real seed capital for the Vance empire came from a man named Alistair Finch. A gasp went through the gallery. The older reporters knew the name. Alistair Finch had been Richard Vance's greatest early rival, a brilliant inventor, a charismatic leader. His company had been poised to crush Vance Technologies in its infancy. In 2005, Elizabeth continued, her voice a chilling monotone. Just weeks before Richard was set to take his company public, Alistair Finch was found dead in his home office. The official ruling was suicide. The media speculated that the pressure of competing with my husband had been too much for him. His company crumbled. Vance Technologies went public to historic success. She closed her eyes for a moment, and the courtroom faded away. She was back in her own home, 20 years earlier. The smell of wood smoke, acrid and wrong, in the middle of a warm summer night. She had come downstairs for a glass of water, unable to sleep. A strange light was flickering from Richard's study. She pushed the door open. He was there, in front of the grand fireplace, frantically feeding files into a blazing fire. Papers, notebooks, folders. The room was hot, and his face was slick with sweat, his eyes wide and feral. He didn't see her at first. He was too consumed by his task. She must have made a sound, because his head snapped up. He saw her, and his face, for a terrifying second, contorted into a mask of pure, murderous rage. He lunged across the room and grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh like claws. His face was inches from hers, the smell of whiskey and smoke on his breath. You saw nothing, he snarled, his voice a low, vicious hiss. Do you understand me, Elizabeth? You came downstairs, the fire was out, and I was asleep in my chair. You saw nothing. Our entire life, this house, David's school, your charities. Everything, it all depends on you seeing nothing. 1. Back in the courtroom, Elizabeth opened her eyes. They were clear and steady. What he was burning were the documents he had used to blackmail Alistair Finch, evidence of a personal indiscretion so profound it would have destroyed Finch's life, his family, his reputation. The price of Richard's silence was $1 million in cash, and the complete surrender of Finch's most valuable patent. That was the money Richard used to launch the IPO. That was the blood on the foundation. This wasn't just financial fraud, Your Honor. The Vance fortune is directly connected to a man's death. A dead, tomb-like silence descended upon the court. David Vance collapsed into his chair, a hollow, broken sound escaping his lips. Chloe stared, her face a mask of horror. Not at the crime, but at the public, irreversible annihilation of their name. In the back of the courtroom, hidden in the shadows of the public gallery, Mia Vance felt the world tilt on its axis. She sat frozen, her phone clutched in her hand. The hushed, angry conversations she had secretly recorded between her parents now played back in her mind, recast in a horrifying new light. Her father's agitated whispers about keeping a lid on things. Her mother's complaints about Grandma's difficult moods. It wasn't about protecting a senile old woman. It was about silencing a witness. The judge, looking pale and shaken, adjourned the proceedings. The room erupted into chaos. As David and Chloe were swarmed by their lawyer, trying to shield them from the flashing cameras of the press, Mia slipped out a side door, her heart hammering against her ribs. That night, the Vance mansion was a tomb. The air was thick with unspoken accusations and the stench of utter ruin. Mia found her parents in the cavernous living room. David was a hollow shell, slumped in an armchair, staring at the blank television screen, a glass of untouched scotch in his trembling hand. He was broken, shattered by the public unveiling of a truth he had spent his life pretending not to know. Chloe, however, was a whirlwind of frantic, hysterical energy. She was pacing the Persian rug, her phone pressed to her ear. "What do you mean the brand is re-evaluating our partnership?" she shrieked into the phone. "It's a lie. All of it. She's a vindictive, senile old crone. We're the victims here." She slammed the phone down, her face contorted with rage. She saw Mia standing in the doorway. "This is your grandmother's fault," she spat, her voice venomous. "She has destroyed us. Everything we've worked for. Our reputation. The money. Do you have any idea what this means? We're ruined." Mia looked from her mother's frantic, greedy face to her father's empty one. There was no remorse, no horror at the story of Alistair Finch, only fear for their status, for their wealth. The disgust that had been simmering inside her for weeks finally boiled over. It was a cold, clean rage. "You're pathetic," she said, her voice quiet but shaking with intensity. "Both of you." She told the truth. "All you care about is the money and what people think of you. You heard what grandfather did, what he was. You heard how he treated her. And all you can talk about is a brand partnership. You don't understand anything," Chloe screamed. "No," Mia said, her voice hardening. "I think for the first time, I understand everything." She turned and walked away, ignoring her mother's shrieks. She went to her room and packed a single bag. Clothes, a laptop, a few books. Then she stopped. She remembered something. Years ago, her father had upgraded his computer. He'd been meticulous about backing up everything from his old hard drives to a private encrypted cloud server. He'd even shown her how to access it once, proud of his technological foresight. She sat down at her own laptop. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. It was a long shot, but the password was the same one he used for everything. The name of his first boat. Legacy. Access granted. Folders bloomed across her screen. Decades of data. Emails. Financial records. Documents. Scanned letters. An entire digital history of David Vance's life and business. A life lived in the shadow of his father's crimes. She plugged in an external hard drive. The download bar appeared, a slow-moving green line. It felt like she was downloading the soul of the house, the final, irrefutable proof. When it was finished, she ejected the drive and slipped it into her pocket. She picked up her bag and walked back down the grand staircase. Her parents were still in the living room, now arguing in low, vicious tones. They didn't even notice her. She pulled the heavy front door open and stepped out into the cool night air. She didn't look back. The sound of her suitcase wheels clicking on the stone driveway was the sound of a lock breaking. It was the sound of her walking out of the gilded cage, forever. The air in the motel room was thick with the ghosts of 1,000 transient live-stale cigarette smoke. Cheap cleaner and a profound, lingering loneliness. Mia sat on the edge of the stiff bed, a single lamp casting a harsh, yellow circle of light on the worn floral bedspread. In front of her, on the rickety particle board desk, sat her laptop and the external hard drive. It felt impossibly heavy, a small black brick containing the ruin of her entire family. Her hands trembled. not from the cold of the overactive air conditioner, but from the aftershocks of the courtroom, the hollow echo of her father's lies, the brittle fury in her mother's eyes. She had driven for 6 hours, fueled by nothing but adrenaline and burnt coffee, stopping only when the exhaustion became a physical danger. She hadn't cried. Not yet. Crying felt like a luxury she hadn't earned. She picked up the burner phone she'd bought with cash at a gas station. She dialed the number she had memorized, the one her grandmother had given her weeks ago, just in case. It rang twice. A sharp electronic sound in the suffocating quiet. A voice, calm and clear as a winter morning, answered. "I was wondering when you would call." "Grandma," Mia whispered, the word catching in her throat. I did it. I left. I have the drive." "I know, my dear," Elizabeth said. There was no surprise in her tone, only a deep, resonant certainty that was an anchor in Mia's swirling panic. "I saw you leave. You were very brave. Are you somewhere safe?" "A motel." "I don't know, a place off the interstate. North of the city." "Good. That's good. Now, I need you to listen to me very carefully, Mia. Can you do that?" "Yes," Mia said, her grip tightening on the small, cheap phone. "First, I want you to take a deep breath. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Do it now." Mia obeyed. The air hitched in her chest, but she forced it out, slow and shaky. Again, Elizabeth commanded gently. She did it again. The frantic drumming in her ears began to subside, replaced by the steady, quiet rhythm of her grandmother's voice. "You are not in danger," Elizabeth stated, not as a reassurance, but as a fact. "Your parents are not looking for you. They are looking for a lawyer who can salvage their reputation. They are trying to stop a tidal wave with their bare hands. You are beneath their notice. And that is our greatest advantage. You are a ghost right now. And ghosts can move where the living cannot." A strange calm settled over Mia. The fear was still there, a cold stone in her stomach, but it was no longer in control. Her grandmother was. "Turn on your laptop," Elizabeth instructed. "Connect to the motel's Wi-Fi, but do not open a standard browser. We are going to build a new door, one they don't know exists." For the next hour, Elizabeth walked her through a process that felt like something out of a spy movie. She directed Mia to download a specific privacy-focused browser, then to a service that generated a temporary encrypted email address. Every step was precise, logical, and stripped of emotion. It was a general directing a soldier on a critical mission. "Now," Elizabeth said, her voice unwavering, "open the hard drive. You will create a new folder on the laptop's desktop. You will copy 3 things into it. First, the scans of the ledger. All of them." Mia's fingers flew across the trackpad. She found the files Harrison had sent her, the high-resolution images of her grandmother's spidery, elegant handwriting detailing decades of sin. She dragged them into the new folder. Each file name was a date, a number, a monument to a crime. "Next," Elizabeth continued, "you will find the folder on the drive labeled Alistair. Your father was a sentimental fool. He kept everything. Inside, there will be correspondence, old financial statements, a timeline. They corroborate the entries in the ledger. Copy the entire folder." Mia navigated the labyrinth of her father's digital life. She found the folder. The name Alistair seemed to burn on the screen. She copied it, feeling a fresh wave of nausea. This was the foundation. The blood on the foundation. And finally, Elizabeth's voice dropped, becoming even quieter, more intense. "The audio files. The ones you recorded." Mia's breath caught. The recordings of her parents. Their panicked whispers after the asset freeze. Their furious, dismissive conversation after the hearing, where they'd talked about Mia as a dramatic child and obsessed only over the PR nightmare. It was the most painful file of all. It was the sound of her childhood ending. Copy them, Elizabeth ordered, her voice leaving no room for hesitation. Mia dragged the audio files into the folder. The three pillars of their downfall, sitting together in a neat digital package. Good, Elizabeth said. Now, compose a new email. You will send it to two recipients. Two separate emails, identical in content. Are you ready for the names? I'm ready, Mia said, her voice barely a whisper. The first is for Sarah Jenkins at the Wall Street Journal. She is a two-time Pulitzer winner. She specializes in corporate malfeasance. She does not bend, and she does not break. Her direct, encrypted contact is on her public profile. Find it. Mia's fingers typed, her heart hammering. She found the contact info, a string of characters that looked like nonsense. She pasted it into the recipient line. The second email, Elizabeth continued, goes to the public submissions portal for the California Attorney General's office. The subject line for both emails will be evidence regarding the Vance Corporation and the death of Alistair Finch. Mia typed the words. They looked stark and terrible on the screen. In the body of the email, you will write only this. The attached files are provided by a concerned party. They are authentic and verifiable. I suggest you look into the number Vance Legacy. Mia typed the sentence. The hashtag felt like a branding iron. Now, Elizabeth said, attach the folder. All of it. The ledger, the corroboration, the audio, everything. Mia compressed the folder and attached it. The progress bar filled slowly, each percentage point a nail in her family's coffin. When it was done, the attachment sat there, a digital bomb waiting to be detonated. Are they both ready to send? Elizabeth asked. Mia looked at the two draft emails, side by side on her screen. Two keystrokes to end a dynasty. Yes, she breathed. Send them, Mia. Mia's finger hovered over the trackpad. She thought of her father, not the monster in the courtroom, but the man who taught her to ride a bike. She thought of her mother, arranging flowers in the vast, empty foyer of the mansion. A tear, hot and sharp, finally escaped and rolled down her cheek. It wasn't for them. It was for the girl who had believed in them. Mia. Elizabeth's voice was soft now. A caress through the phone line. Your father made his choice when he watched his own mother bleed and did nothing. Your mother made her choice every time she put on another diamond bracelet bought with that money. You are not destroying them. You are simply turning on the light. They have been in the dark for a very long time. Send it. Mia clicked, and then she clicked again. The drafts vanished. Sent. Gone. The silence that followed was absolute. It's done, Mia whispered. Yes, Elizabeth said. Now, wipe the laptop. Use the secure erase function I showed you. Then, break the burner phone in half. Remove the SIM card and battery and dispose of the pieces in separate trash cans. Go get some sleep. The world will be very different when you wake up. The line went dead. Mia did exactly as she was told. She wiped the computer, turning it back into an anonymous machine. She snapped the small phone, the plastic cracking with a satisfying finality. She threw the pieces away in different bins behind the motel. She lay down on the stiff mattress and closed her eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. She just lay there, floating in the strange, terrifying calm of the aftermath. The first tremor hit 27 hours later. It started not with a bang, but with a notification on the new, clean phone Mia had bought that morning. A news alert from the Wall Street Journal. The headline was stark. The Vance Legacy. A decades-long empire built on fraud and extortion. Leaked documents implicate founder in competitor's 1,998 death. And then the world caught fire. Within an hour, number Vance Legacy was the #1 trending topic on X globally. It wasn't just a news story. It was a digital wildfire. News outlets, from legacy media to TikTok commentators, scrambled to catch up. Snippets of the ledger were everywhere. Elizabeth's elegant script a shocking contrast to the ugly crimes it detailed. Audio clips of David and Chloe's panicked voices went viral, remixed into memes of spectacular corporate downfall. Chloe's carefully curated Instagram, a monument to blood money brunches and soulless luxury, became a digital wasteland. The comments section was a torrent of pure vitriol, thousands upon thousands of strangers leaving snake and vomit emojis, calling her a ghoul, a monster, a modern-day Marie Antoinette. It was a feeding frenzy. And it was only the beginning. The morning broke over the Vance estate with a deceptive tranquility. The California sun slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Chloe was in the master bathroom, staring at her own reflection. She hadn't slept. Her face was puffy, her eyes shot with red. Her phone lay face down on the marble countertop, a dead thing she was too afraid to touch. Every notification was a fresh stab. Friends or people she'd called friends had been texting her all night. First with feigned concern, then with pointed questions, and finally with a deafening silence. The invitations to galas and charity balls, once the bedrock of her existence, were now just mocking reminders of a world that had slammed its doors in her face. David was in his study, the one he'd inherited from Richard. He was on the phone, his voice a low, desperate growl. "I don't care what it takes, Jonathan. You file an injunction. You sue them for libel. Sarah Jenkins? The Wall Street Journal? We'll own them. We'll—" He trailed off. He knew it was bluster. He knew it was over. He could hear the pity in his lawyer's voice. The ledger was damning. The timeline was irrefutable. But the audio was the executioner's axe. His own voice, his wife's voice, stripped of all pretense, dripping with greed and callousness. He had been so careful to maintain the image of the dutiful son, the savvy heir. And Mia, his own daughter, had burned it all to the ground with a few sound files. "David," Chloe said, appearing in the doorway. She was wrapped in a silk robe, but she looked like a wraith. "There are cars coming up the driveway. A lot of them. Black cars." David dropped the phone. He strode to the window, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. A convoy of black sedans and SUVs crunched to a halt on the gravel in front of the mansion. Doors opened, and men and women in dark suits and windbreakers, emblazoned with 3 bold yellow letters, FBI, spilled out. The doorbell chimed. A polite, incongruous sound in the face of their impending doom. For a moment, neither of them moved. They were frozen. 2 statues in a collapsing museum. "Don't answer it," Chloe whispered, her voice trembling. "If we don't answer, maybe they'll go away." David let out a harsh, broken laugh. "Go away? Chloe, they're not here to sell us cookies. They're here to take everything." He walked, stiff-legged, out of the study and down the grand, sweeping staircase that he had always been so proud of. He opened the massive oak doors. A man in a crisp suit, his face impassive, stood on the threshold, holding up a badge and a thick sheaf of papers. "David Vance?" the agent asked, his voice flat and professional. "Yes," David managed to say. "I'm Special Agent Miller with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have a warrant to search these premises in connection with an ongoing federal investigation into wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy, and the wrongful death of Alistair Finch." Behind him, the team of agents moved past him into the foyer, fanning out with a quiet, terrifying efficiency. They were already placing evidence tags on paintings, on sculptures, on the very furniture they stood on. "You can't do this," David stammered, the last vestiges of his authority crumbling into dust. "We can, and we are," Agent Miller said, his eyes cold. "We'll also be seizing all personal electronics, vehicles, and financial records. You and Mrs. Vants are considered persons of interest. You have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you use it until your lawyer arrives. Chloe let out a strangled sob from the top of the stairs as an agent gently but firmly took her phone from her hand. They were methodical. They moved through the house like surgeons, excising the life David and Chloe had built. They took the laptops, the tablets, the designer handbags, the keys to the Porsche, and the Bentley. Every symbol of their status, every shield they had used to protect themselves from the world was being catalogued and carried away. Their friends had abandoned them. Their reputation was a smoking crater. And now their gilded cage was being dismantled, piece by piece, right before their eyes. Miles away, in the meticulously kept gardens of Silver Creek Meadows, Elizabeth Vance sat on a wrought-iron bench beneath the shade of a jacaranda tree. The air was sweet with the scent of lavender and roses. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves above her. She held a tablet in her lap, the one Mia had brought her weeks before. On the screen was a live newsfeed, a helicopter shot of her former home, swarming with federal agents. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Vance Empire collapses." She watched it all with a profound and unnerving calm. There was no triumph in her expression, no flicker of vengeful glee. There was only a quiet, somber finality. This was not a victory, it was a necessary amputation. A rot had been festering at the heart of her family for 50 years, and it had finally been cut out. She had sacrificed her son, her home, the entire life she had known to do it. But she had also cauterized a wound that had been poisoning them all for generations. A soft chime came from the burner phone in her pocket. She put the tablet aside and took out the phone. A single new text message was on the screen. It was from Mia. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a revolution. "It's done. I'm outside. We can go anywhere you want." Elizabeth looked up from the phone, past the pristine flower beds and the manicured lawns of her prison. Through the ornate iron gates at the end of the driveway, she could see a small, unremarkable rental car parked on the curb. She could just make out the silhouette of a young woman in the driver's seat, waiting. Slowly, Elizabeth stood up. She left the tablet on the bench, a relic of a war that was now over. She walked, not with the hesitant shuffle of an old woman, but with the steady, purposeful stride of a queen abdicating a corrupt throne. She didn't look back. She walked through the gates of Silver Creek Meadows, leaving the gilded cage behind for the last time, and got into the car. The door closed with a soft, solid click. Freedom. The epilogue of the Vance dynasty was written not in boardrooms or headlines, but in the quiet, unyielding language of the law. Elizabeth's testimony, delivered with the same clear-eyed, devastating precision she had displayed at the competency hearing, ensured the complete and utter dismantling of the Vance fortune. The mansions, the stock portfolios, the art collections, the network of shell corporations was all unravelled. The money, stained by decades of deceit and the ghost of Alistair Finch, was seized by the government. But Elizabeth had no interest in the spoils. In a final, decisive act, she worked with the Attorney General's office to ensure that the vast majority of the recovered assets were funneled into a newly created foundation. It was named not for Vance, but for the Victimsa Fund, dedicated to providing legal aid and financial support to those crushed by the gears of corporate crime. She never wanted the blood money. She just wanted it to stop doing harm. Her own freedom was paid for by a different currency. Decades ago, her own mother had left her a small but significant inheritance, placed in a trust so ironclad that not even Richard Vance, with all his cunning and control, could ever touch it. It was her money, pure and simple, and it was enough. She and Mia drove north. They left the sun-scorched hills of California behind, watching the landscape soften into the misty, green-draped coastline of Oregon. They didn't talk much on the drive. They didn't need to. The silence was comfortable, filled with an unspoken understanding. They were two survivors, charting a course toward a new world. They settled in a small, anonymous town where the land meets the sea, a place of fishing boats and salt-sprayed air, where no one knew the name Vance and no one cared. They bought a modest house, a simple two-bedroom cottage with cedar shingles and a wide porch that overlooked the churning grey expanse of the Pacific Ocean. It was small, filled with second-hand furniture and the smell of sea salt and pine. It was the first true home Elizabeth had ever known. They lost a great deal. Elizabeth lost a son, a life, a history. Mia lost her parents, her innocence, the very foundation of her identity. But what they gained was immeasurable. One cool afternoon, Elizabeth stood on the porch, a thick wool sweater wrapped around her shoulders, watching the waves crash against the dark volcanic rock of the shore. Each wave was an erasure, washing the sand clean, again and again. Mia came and stood beside her, slipping her hand into her grandmother's. Elizabeth's fingers, thin and cool, wrapped around hers. "Listen," Elizabeth said, her voice a soft murmur against the roar of the ocean. Mia listened. She heard the gulls crying, the wind whistling past the eaves of the house, the endless, rhythmic surge and retreat of the tide. "That's the sound," Elizabeth whispered, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "It's the sound of nothing. No secrets. No lies. No locked doors." She took a breath, a deep, shuddering inhalation that seemed to draw in the wild, clean air of the entire coastline. It was a breath she had been waiting to take for more than 50 years. A breath free from the weight of Richard's shadow, free from the gilded cage of her life, free from the terrible, silent burden of the truth. Watching the endless grey water meet the endless grey sky, Elizabeth Vance finally, truly felt free.